Camera. Good morning and a very warm welcome to those who are in the room with us at MEDB Pavilion and those who are joining us online live streamed. We are delighted to have you here all on this interesting discussion and to explore the role of evidence in the climate change action. And particularly, we'll be looking at to explore how evidence-driven independent evaluation could help policymakers, financiers, and decision makers. I am Iskander Zaleke, head of the independent evaluation function with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank based in Beijing. So climate change has always been the center of discussion. And this year, among the two pillars, enabling action is one of the pillars set forth by the COP29 presidency. What does that actually mean, enabling action? It means how are we going to support efficient and effective implementation through technological, financial, and capacity support to our member countries. That will take me to my institution, AIIB. Established in 2016, AIIB has been a pioneer of infrastructure financing throughout Asia and around the globe. To date, AIIB has 110 member countries and approved 53 billion USD dollars in 289 countries. So AIIB's principle, lean green, is focused consistent with the climate change agendas. AIIB has been financing countries, example in Kazakhstan, helping the country translate to a green economy. In India, a 1 billion USD is upcoming in next year in a solar pipe water. In Tajikistan, we are working on approving one of the largest solar panel projects. So AIIB has been working both in adaptation, mitigation, and helping member countries transition to green economy. The session today aims at bringing a different climate change stakeholders, enabling how evidence could driven and impact the climate change decision and the discussion around the globe. As we speak in COP in Baku, there are a lot of discussion going on, division among what's the right balance between adaptation, mitigation, and financing. And that's why independent evaluation will play a critical role than ever to be driven by evidence, to make sure that what's working, what can be replicated at project level, at thematic level, and at country strategic level. So with this, I will kick off our session today by introducing you our keynote speaker, Carmen Nonat, Director, Finance, Private Sector, Infrastructure and Sustainable Development at Independent Evaluation Group of World Bank. Carmen has been a pioneer of development, both at operation and evaluation, currently responsible for overseeing over 2/3 of the World Bank portfolio. It's unfortunate we don't have Carmen today with us, but she was kind enough to send opening remark through her video. So please join me to listen to her opening remark. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning and welcome to this pivotal panel discussion on independent evaluation perspectives on climate finance, policy, and programs, how evidence can shape action, hosted here at the joint MEDB Pavilion at COP29. I am Carmen Nonat, World Bank's Group Director for Sustainable Development, Infrastructure, and Private Sector at their Independent Evaluation Group, AIIG. Having worked in international development across finance, infrastructure, and sustainability, I have now the privilege of overseeing evaluations that provide actionable evidence for accountability, learning, and ultimately impactful results in development in those critical areas. Though I regret not joining you in person today, I wish to express my deep appreciation to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and its evaluation and learning function for organizing this critical discussion. As an institution committed to infrastructure and climate resilience, AIIB is ideally suited to host today's dialogue on evidence-based climate action. Today, as we convene near the end of 2 busy weeks of intense COP29 negotiations, we are all mindful of the new collective quantified goal for climate finance, an outcome that will define global climate action for years to come. In this context, independent evaluations are essential, offering evidence on what works, what doesn't work, and why. These insights can guide international climate finance, influence policy, and improve program interventions, ensuring that our actions are informed by lessons from the past and geared towards meaningful future impact. COP29 is a global stage where nations, organizations, and stakeholders come together to shape a sustainable future for all of us. Our session today here underscores the evaluations community's commitment to evidence-based decision-making, which is crucial for achieving the ambitious targets of the Paris Agreement and beyond. Through today's panel, we aim to explore how independent evaluation, with its focus on rigorous evidence, can shape effective climate finance and drive concrete climate action. At AIIG, we are dedicated to building a robust foundation of evidence across sustainable development, infrastructure, private and public sector engagement, and finance. Evidence not only guides decision-making, but it bridges the gap between policy and real-world outcomes. Strengthening the role of independent evaluations fosters a culture of accountability and continuous learning, both vital to achieving sustained and effective climate action. This session offers us a platform to share insights, strengthen collaboration, and amplify the impact of our efforts in climate finance. I look forward to the perspective of our distinguished evaluators and experts from the different NDBs. The diversity of insights we bring today reflects the collaborative spirit needed to address climate change. Let us view this as the beginning of an ongoing dialogue between NDBs and bilateral partners, a collaboration that we hope to deepen as we look towards COP30 in Brazil next year. By addressing evidence gaps and evaluating effectiveness from an independent standpoint, we can help drive transparent, accountable, and results-oriented climate action. Together, we can ensure that climate finance reaches the areas of greatest impact, aligns with national priorities, and delivers sustainable solutions. Thank you once again to AIIB and to all participants for joining this important discussion today. I look forward to the insightful conversations ahead.
Thank you very much. What an enlightening opening remark. I really want to reiterate a couple of points from Carmen's opening remark. Yes, this is the beginning of the collaboration among MDBs, bilateral, and even non-governmental organizations. As you can tell, the stake is very high. So we need rigorous, well-taught, evidence-based to inform the climate finance impact and agendas. And the second point, as we all know, next year we will have COP13 in Brazil. So this session will ultimately form and pave the way for a continuous engagement among MDBs and bilateral agency. With this, please join me welcoming our diverse and distinguished panels to the stage. I will call Ms. Nancy, a Chief Climate Change Expert at AIIB and the EU platform. Nancy, for me, it's the first time to meet her in person, but I have known her through, her advocate in the world-renowned climate change, especially when it came to adaptation. She's one of the world's most cited advocates for climate change adaptation. Nancy, it's a pleasure meeting you, and your passion in pushing the sustainable finance agenda, taxonomy at higher level at EU is highly regarded. So it's a pleasure and honor to have you with us. Thank you. Now, I will call upon Shimako, a senior evaluation specialist at the Asian Independent Evaluation Group. Shimado, a natural resource professional, currently leading a huge number of independent evaluation at AIIB. Please join me also welcome Shimako. It's a pleasure having you here, Shimako. Theo, now we'll go to EBRD. We have a principal manager from EBRD. Theo is passionate about climate change, green strategy, renewable energies, and a very taught and well sought after evaluator. It's not easy to have an evaluator who has a subject matter expert and knowledge on these specific niche areas. So Theo is currently leading a thematic evaluation EBRD. Shortly he will tell us more about it. Theo, please welcome to the stage. Now I will move to Kevin. Kevin is from our bilateral DEVAL. That's why you see the composition of our panels tells us how diverse, and we want to have a thoughtful conversation. An evaluator at German Institute for Development Evaluation at DEVAL, Kevin has been evaluating the climate and energy portfolio of German Development Corporation since 2018. Previously, he worked in the Technical Development Corporation, REDD, and Ecosystem Service in Ecuador and Colombia. So his experience also will tell us a lot. Kevin, please join us on the stage. Okay, now I will tell you a little bit about the structure of our today's discussion. I have structured in two formats. The first round of discussion would basically tell us what every respective institution currently doing and sharing experience, particularly evidence-based regard to evaluation. And the second round will give us another set of global perspective. So what's next? What can we jointly do or continue to promote for an actionable, evidence-based climate finance? So the first round goes now, Kevin. Let me start with you, as you are our bilateral friends here. With your extensive expertise on climate energy portfolio with a bilateral aid, especially in the allocation of global and bilateral climate finance, could you please share insight on the climate distribution of this financing? Are resources being channeled into the instrument and the sector with the highest potential and priorities for mitigation and adaptation? How do you strike the balance? Additionally, I have one more question on this round for you. Additionally, how is the balance between adaptation to climate change, mitigation are well? Please, the floor is yours, Kevin.
Eskander, thank you very much. So I will provide some insights from a very recent evaluation that we completed on climate change mitigation ODA for different bilateral donors, but also specifically Germany, looking at the quantity, the quality, but also the distribution of climate finance. And we have some very interesting results. And one of the first is that we looked at this balance between being able to support least developed countries with high socioeconomic need and balancing that with the mitigation potential that we saw for more medium income emerging economies. And what we found was that Germany does provide a lot of money, a lot more money towards socioeconomic need for their allocation and selection of mitigation aid rather than mitigation potential. So we threw that into the room, and as a future point of discussion, how can German ODA have a larger mitigation impact, but also still focus on the portfolio that is the countries that are most in need to receive mitigation funding. That is one. The second one is that we looked at the transparency and particularly the reporting of climate finance. Now that the NCQG is being so heavily discussed, but also in terms of achieving the fair share that the many bilateral countries committed to, we found that Germany actually is committing a fair share. In terms of looking at the historical emissions, the size of the economy and such, Germany's ODA was calculated to be about 8% of this 100 billion goal that was previously agreed to. However, we find that there's a lot of over-reporting of climate finance, and that is a central issue. So we found that between 1/3 and 1/4 of climate finance actually is not climate finance at all. And we found that for both adaptation and mitigation. So we really need to improve the reporting and transparency that goes into climate finance reporting. If we want to know what works, we need to know how much money is going into climate finance. That was a key result. Another one is that we see significant evaluation and evidence gaps, both for mitigation and adaptation. So while we found very direct effects for mitigation in terms of emissions reductions, for technological and infrastructure interventions and instruments, it was much harder to show emissions reductions as a result of policies, institutional and regulatory frameworks. So really our job as an evaluation institute is to fill that evidence gap, also maybe together with the MDBs and their evaluation institutes, because we are having trouble really tracking from ODA to how does this eventually relate to an emissions reduction, because the causal pathways are so long, there's so many intermediary outcomes and effects. We're really having this attribution gap that if you're an evaluator, you're very familiar with this problem. And that is also for adaptation actually the case. We did an evidence gap map on adaptation. We found that there's a huge evidence base in the parts of agriculture, climate smart agriculture, technologies, but really this enabling environment for long-term transformational change towards low carbon development pathways, that is really lacking. And we need to generate more evidence in that space because we need to implement both adaptation and mitigation faster and scale it up, because we're seeing the urgency of climate change. It's widespread. It's intensifying both in frequency and number. So we need to act faster. So we also need to generate evidence much faster. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for your thoughtful reaction. Yes, indeed, Germany is playing a pivotal role, contributing 8% of the 100 billion. Actually, maybe probably it's one of the countries who walk the talk. And also the studies that you did amplifies how the balance of mitigation, adaptation, based by evidence. And particularly what makes more interesting is Dival's insight is the amount of care you did also least developed country. That would be much appreciated, Kevin. Now I will move to Nancy, AIIB. As AIIB's chief climate change expert, you recently oversaw an external audit of AIIB climate action in learning and borrowing. Could you please share your experience from this audit process? What were the key insights and the evidence that emerged, particularly around the AIIB's alignment with climate goal and effectiveness in leveraging finance for impactful climate action? Please.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I am not in the EIB's evaluation team, but they are very, very engaged and wished the best for this important discussion. I will try and mention some of the things that they have been doing later. But to answer your specific question, what I thought I could bring to this discussion is the two types of external audit that we have been through at the bank, and how these aspects of the sort of external scrutiny, if you like, or independent scrutiny, how they are similar and how one can learn from them in the same way that the evaluations that are done by the evaluations teams are effectively, in a way, sort of independent third party, sort of, even though they're within our organizations. So we have a sustainability audit, which is carried out by our auditors, and it's separate from the financial audit. Although, for those of you that know about ISSB and the CSRD in the EU, which leads to the environmental sustainability reporting standards, the whole point of that is to bring sustainability reporting together with financial reporting so that they will no longer be seen as separate. But anyway, what I'm going to talk about is the audits under the old system, if you like, where the sustainability audit was a sort of standalone audit, different from the financial audit. And actually, we have a lady sitting in the audience. Raise your hand, Francesca, and wave. She's here because she wanted to hear what I had to say. But in fact, she used to be the person in charge of the EIB's sustainability report. So if you want to quiz her afterwards, she's a good person to talk to. But we have two sorts of external audits. One is our own audits, as I said, by our auditors, the sustainability audit, and the other is occasionally by the European Court of Auditors. When we use EU funds, like, for example, for guarantees, then we have those audits. And both of them bring a particular perspective because they're looking not only at the finance flows, but also the impact. And that's because in the Court of Auditors case, that is part of their remit. It's to look at whether the finance flowed that was set aside in the EU budget and whether it had the impact that was expected. And so if there is some funds that we have, they want to know whether those two things apply where it was in the bank. But in our external audit, simply because we not only report our finance flows for climate and environment, our greenhouse gas figures, but we also report many other impact-related, results-related indicators, which are also audited. So I think both of these external audits have that aspect of you're looking at the finance, looking at the methodologies, but also looking at the results and the impacts. So what have we learned? Well, first of all, it started with the lending and came to the borrowing later. And I think that's an interesting point to make. We started with reporting on our climate action lending. Now we do green, so it's climate action and environmental sustainability. And that is done at limited assurance. But starting about 5 or 6, maybe even 7 years ago, I can't remember exactly, there was an audit started on our green bonds. And that is reasonable assurance. And in both cases, they have very specific sort of auditing standards, like what sampling they have to do, exactly what procedures they have to look at. And they don't audit the actual methodologies. So, for example, for greenhouse gas, they don't actually audit the methodologies. They audit whether you're doing what you said, whether you're using your published methodology, whether it is something that the paper trail can be followed, but also whether when they sample the projects, they feel that you've actually shown that you've used that methodology on the project. So there's a number of things we've learned, and you could probably talk all day. It's a two-edged sword because sometimes you find out things that you did know, and it helps you drive the agenda within your organization to have an outside entity highlighting it. And I think that's similar with the role of EV. Sometimes the teams knew it, but they needed some extra impulse, if you like, to get something to happen. But sometimes it's something that you hadn't thought of. And then it's really important because they're basically giving you a heads up of something that you need to deal with, you need to look at before a problem is created. So I'll give you two learning examples maybe that just help you understand what I mean. One is we learned that we needed to think much more carefully about how we record how we got to the answer, which comes back to your point about. So this is not to suggest there was any greenwashing or anything wrong with the figures. But what we found was that by the time the auditors came to look at it, sometimes the person wasn't there anymore. Sometimes they couldn't remember, whatever. So we realized that we needed to have a recording system of their thinking, how they got to that amount of climate finance. And so we introduced a specific annex where, unless it's literally something that's 100% mitigation like a wind farm, you have to write down how you calculated it, on the basis of what, using what information and so on, so that that audit can take place. And that, of course, leads to robustness, because once you tell teams that they have to write it down, then they have to think it through and they have to make sure that there's logic and they refer to the right documents. So that was a fantastic, I would say, improvement. The second thing that we learned from the audit was something. So I would say that one we knew. That's an example of something we knew, but we needed somebody else to help kick that over the line. The second thing was something we hadn't thought of, and that was that we had the most robust processes in place with checking to make sure that when we allocated climate action to the projects, it was done in a robust way, recorded, checked again. But when there's a change later, the auditor said, well, okay, who authorizes the change? And we said, well, we just change it. If it's wrong, we just change it. And they were, yeah, but how do you know that that's done right? And who kind of agreed to it? And we're like, oh, okay, we hadn't really thought about that. So they said, okay, but you need a procedure for changes. So if you have to change the climate action percentage of the project up or down, you need a procedure, and somebody needs to be the second pair of eyes that was a good change. So that's an example of something that we learnt, which we didn't know about. Yeah. And I think I'll just stop there, but just hopefully that gives you a flavor of it.
No, this absolutely, fantastic. Having Nancy with us, as she said, she's not evaluator, but she's consumer of evaluation product. That's what makes this panel unique. What you just mentioned, myself as a certified energy and environmental auditor in my past career, as I have started the US EPA, so I'm absolutely mindful of the recurring issue, and especially when it came to greenwashing, is one of the top issue even today. What's green? Maybe that will take us to a separate topic. I wouldn't go there, but thank you so much, Nancy, for sharing this insightful experience. Now let's go to ADB. Shimako, how are you? Shimako, as a co-lead of the evaluation of ADB support for climate action, climate change since 2021 to 2023, could you share the key finding and insight from the evaluation? And additionally, how do you ensure that those evaluations generate efficiency and utilization by the ADB management? Ultimately, evaluation is influence. How do you make sure the change, all the recommendations will really yield intended result? Thank you.
Thank you, Eskander. And first of all, thank you so much for having IED on the session. In 2021, ADB's Independent Evaluation Department, IED, published a climate change evaluation report for ADB support on climate action for previous decade. So this time we are preparing a topical paper which provide update on ADB's climate support since 2021 over the 3 years. And the paper will be published in a few weeks after. So I'd like to share 3 messages today from the paper. The first is about ADB progress. So ADBs have increased climate finance steadily, reaching to 20 billion over the past 3 years towards the climate finance target of 100 billion or beyond by 2030. And ADB's climate strategies have intensified mainly through our country partnership strategies. More recently, ADB's Climate Change Action Plan is influencing the country partnership strategies, CPS, through the requirement of a dedicated country climate investment plan to attach to the CPS. At the project level, climate indicators both for outcomes and outputs have increased. So those are a summary of the progress of ADB, the first message. Secondly, with those progress, ADB needs to specify what outcomes are actually being achieved at country levels, focusing more on learning, both during implementation and at completion. So currently, ADB's climate effort concentrated more on project preparation. For example, climate change assessment or climate risk and vulnerability assessment or Paris alignment assessment, those assessments are required during project design, but they are not mandatory to be assessed at completion. So by systematically learning from those upfront investment resources to project design and learning lesson captured, then ADB can enhance the design of the future climate projects. So ADB needs to go beyond the achievement of climate finance target to include outcome achievement and lesson learned. So that is the second point. A third point is about climate expertise. So much effort to enhance and embed climate expertise within ADBs are underway. And climate expertise has grown rapidly, particularly since 2021, with the new climate staff, about 81 staff as of early October. So to maximize their impact, it is essential to implement a strategic plan for effective staff deployment, ensuring those climate staff are strategically positioned throughout the institution. So that is our third message. And responding to your second part of the question, so how to drive the meaningful actions, in our previous climate evaluation report, 2021, had 6 recommendations that were integrated into management action response systems, ensuring actionable insights are addressed. So this integration is crucial for translating evaluative findings into concrete actions. In last year, 1 year ago, ADB published our first climate change action plan, which signaled a strategic whole-of-the-bank approach to climate action. And the action plan built upon the IED's evaluation report, so demonstrating our commitment, evaluation's commitment to using evaluation finding or evidence to inform strategic initiatives. And yeah, so this topical paper is provide update for climate support, as I mentioned earlier. So this do not have recommendation, but the value of the topical paper lies in fostering open and proactive discussions among stakeholders that can generate clear or some new insight or ideas that can lead to actionable or meaningful actions. So I hope our topical paper will serve as a platform for further discussion among stakeholders, particularly within the ADB, as well as the broader communities, including evaluators and climate practitioners. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shimako. An insightful reaction indeed. I mean, I want to reiterate and compliment ADB's commitment. Almost 20 billion of portfolio is a huge amount. And also, I can't agree with you more. Some of the lessons that really captured. And I think this story would appeal to all MEDBs, I would say. Mostly, especially the lack of outcome-driven indicators. You have, let's say, 500 megawatt of energy. So what? That's the output. But as a consequence of building that energy, what happened to the society? How was that emission was reduction? So is there also counterfactual? In absence of that project, what would have happened? So I really like that. That's the area that we all also working on and will be enhancing. And also I'm glad you have well-established management action record to track the recommendations. That would also helpful. I think the other also important point you mentioned is climate change is a very niche area. Having industry specialists, subject matter expert, change the game, especially during the design of a project, especially infrastructure project. You may have the investment lead who's leading the entire package of operations, but you need to have also industry specialists. Again, if it's energy, someone who knows about energy efficiency, greenhouse gas emission, calculations, the same, transport, smart city. So having subject matter expert on the other side really help for the quality of also evaluation. If at a project design, there is not well-thought result measurement framework that capture both the output and the outcome, I think it also affects the quality of the evaluation at the end. Thank you so much. With this, now I'll go to Theo, EBRD. Theo, as the lead on comprehensive evaluation of EBRD's climate finance strategy, what key findings are emerging so far? How are you ensuring that those insights are not only informative, but also actionable and aligned with EBRD's strategic priority? Thank you.
Thank you, Iskander, and thank you also to the AIIB for organizing today's panel. So a key feature of the EBRD's green finance strategy that we're currently evaluating is that it set the lofty ambition of trying to move the EBRD away from a mainstreaming approach to green finance towards a systemic approach to green finance, where we're focusing not just on the immediate outputs and outcomes from the EBRD's green financing, but we're also asking the question, are we creating green finance investment opportunities for other market stakeholders, and particularly for the private sector? And so that's really the focus of this evaluation, which reflects the fact that our estimate in the EBRD countries of operation is that we provide roughly 2% of their external climate financing needs. And so the 98% is going to have to come from somewhere else, a large majority from the private sector. And so we have to ask the question, not only how are we maximizing and expanding upon that 2%, what are we doing to enable that other 98%? And that gets into some of the policy dialogue that we're doing, that gets into some of the enabling investments that we're doing that try and unlock subsequent additional investments down the line. It gets into the demonstration effects that we're hoping to catalyze, and the market confidence that we're hoping to provide, and thus by doing so, crowding in private sector investment. But a reoccurring feature, a reoccurring theme of looking at our contribution to these creation of additional green finance investment opportunities is the lack of evidence and the lack of data that we have that Kevin was describing earlier, where we have a much more concrete idea. If we build a solar power plant, the size of it, 500 megawatts, that's pretty easy. We can have a pretty good estimate of the CO2 mitigation that contributes towards. The more difficult question, the more complex question is, right, how has that changed investor confidence in this market going forward? How has that changed how investors see renewable energy in Uzbekistan, in Azerbaijan, in Jordan, in Georgia, in Jordan and in Georgia? Do they see this as a feasible investment opportunity? And can we see a viable future where these investments happen without MDB intervention? I mean, that's sort of, the end goal for us for a lot of these areas, that we want to see these markets developing and these markets maturing without MDBs like the EBRD playing that sort of anchor investment role. In terms of making this evaluation actionable, it's kind of sort of a basic point, but the big thing here for us is timing. We're coming to the end of this climate finance strategy. So that gives us, as the independent evaluation department, an opportunity, a window to feed into the next iteration of the climate finance strategy. But it's quite a sort of time-constrained window too. So we're constantly sort of straddling the balance of coming too late to feed into that next strategy, but then also coming too soon to be able to see the results, because systemic change takes time, behavioral change takes time. And so we're constantly sort of struggling with this tension of are we coming too late to be able to find and identify the changes that we want to see, but also coming too late to actually feed into that next strategy and to influence decision making in the institution. The sort of key aspect to this that I think we're trying to be very careful about is the scope of these evaluations as a result. So trying to be realistic and feasible around what we can and can't cover in this evaluation, what we might expect to see and what we might expect not to see after only a few years of implementation. And related to that, not just focusing on what systemic changes have occurred, but trying to link that back to institutional and organizational processes. So trying to understand how we set ourselves up to lead to those changes too. And so looking into the nuts and bolts of how projects are designed, the investment decision-making process, and how we've integrated systemic change considerations into project design from the earliest stage.
Thank you so much, Theo. That was a fantastic reaction. I fully agree with you. I think one of our role as MDB is not the amount of money we bring on the table, but the catalytic role we play on the private sector mobilization. You're absolutely right. That's one of the findings. Their evaluation could still play a role. Is this a practical example when we say evidence-based evaluation could guide how much is enough? What contributions could MED be played to mobilize private sector? The 2% versus the 98% you mentioned is a classic example. Especially EBRD is uniquely positioned as IFC, which mostly focused on private sector investment. So thank you for sharing those experience. With this, the first round of panel discussion now successfully completed. Now I will move to our second discussion to bit a little bit broader perspective to cover. As the saying goes, the last one would become the first one. Again, I will start from Theo. Theo, drawing from your experience as an evaluator in a climate space, covering areas like solar, green building, and EBRD's green finance initiative, what are the main challenges of independent evaluation to effectively drive climate action in your view? What are the essential success factors to bridge evaluation insight into impactful climate strategy at upstream, downstream level? Thank you.
Thank you, Iskandar, and apologies to our audience for not giving you a break from me. The key challenge I think we face is the speed of change in many of the sectors within the climate world. As evaluators, we always have a historical perspective. We're always looking backwards, and particularly with the pace of some MDB projects and the pace of implementation, that means we're looking at projects which might have been signed 4, 5, 6 years in the past. And in many of the markets we're looking at, Iskandar, you mentioned solar. The solar market has transformed dramatically in the past 5 or 6 years. So the context in which these projects were signed, the context in which these projects were approved, looks very different to the environment that we're currently dealing with today. And so in terms of preparing insights from those projects, we have to be aware of the different circumstances that our institutions are now operating in. So I think for evaluators, what this means is we can't be too rigid-minded and too focused on the actual project we're evaluating. We can't sort of be too single-minded on that. We have to take a sort of slightly wider perspective and keep up to date with ongoing developments in the sector and ongoing developments in our institution, so that we're not preparing insights which are now out of date by the time we bring them, because things are changing so dramatically and so quickly in some of the sectors that we're experiencing. In terms of sort of other success factors and other challenges that we've been having, my sort of big mantra as an evaluator in climate finance is to ask the difficult question of what are we doing that we're bad at. it's a sort of challenging question for institutions to deal with, particularly because there's so much emphasis on having to do something in the climate space. We all need to do something. We all need to take action. We can't also have every institution do everything. It's good for institutions to specialize, to find their niche, to find their role. And sort of, trying to sort of have difficult conversations with both management and with board directors around saying, right, what are we as an institution not so good at, and what do we need to maybe step away from, or think a little bit more carefully about how we're going forward in this space, because it seems to be an area where we're putting a lot of energy, but it doesn't also seem to match our core competencies or core capabilities. And being able to sort of ask that difficult question of, where are our organizational weaknesses, and where does that actually lead us to conclude that we shouldn't be devoting resources and energy towards, is, I think, one of the advantages that independent evaluation can bring in terms of driving climate action forward and driving effective climate action forward.
Thank you very much, Theo. That's very well thought response. I think, as I said before, when Shimako was reacting to what the investment office has to do from the investment angle, I think there are also homework from us evaluator angle to really equip ourselves with a very changing situation and emerging issues like climate change. Do our really standard evaluation criteria like the DACA can really accommodate climate change? Climate change by its own is everything. It could be health, it could be biodiversity, it could be nature, it could be politics. So also there is some well-thought ongoing discussion among our MEDB evaluators that need to be carried out. Thank you. Now let me come back, Shimako, to you. From your recent experience, what is important for the design and the conduct of evaluation to ensure that evidence can shape action? What can evaluation do better? Is there any area you think, if you would have done this evaluation all over again, where do you want to change? Thank you.
Thank you, Iskander. And I like some of the points Theo mentioned about very quick changing of the context. So 4 essential points I want to raise. And the first is about the understanding of the context. And second is about the alignment of stakeholders' needs. The third is early engagement of stakeholders in evaluation, particularly in designing evaluation. And the fourth point about embracing learning. So evaluators must have a good understanding of context and must grasp the specific context of projects and also climate initiatives, including environmental, social, and economic factors. So this contextualized approach helps evaluations are relevant and also tailored to the real needs of unique challenges faced by stakeholders. And second, the alignment with stakeholders' needs. It is crucial to have a strong connection between evaluation questions and stakeholders' priorities. So this connection shapes robust evaluation questions and also methodologies. So leading to actionable insights, because those good connections ensure the evaluation address what matters most to local government or beneficiaries or policymakers. So I value primary information, which evaluation can get through the interaction with local stakeholders as well. Thirdly, particularly in designing evaluation, some early engagement of stakeholders in evaluation process will shape a good, robust evaluation question. There are also methodologies, particularly when we create or build a theory of change. Sometimes we need to refine later. But those early engagement of stakeholders, when they really need or what they're concerned, those should be factored in the designing of the evaluation, which will enhance applicability or impact of finding in the future. Finally, as Theo mentioned, a lot of changes happening in the world, and particular evaluation related to the climate change or the environment is quite complex and requires a holistic or multidisciplinary approaches. And I often adopt mixed methods, qualitative, quantitative, and also multiple data sources, including geospatial data or GIS, or probably in the future AI also coming in. So evaluator need to keep running, actually, and also in the course of the evaluation, sometimes we need to look back or refine the evaluation process again to be more suitable for the context of the project. So evaluators have to keep up dynamic learning process. That I cannot agree more to Theo mentioned. So yeah, so the improvement, probably two things I wanted to highlight. The first is focus on practical recommendation. So evaluations are very much evidence-based or fact-based, and I value primary information, but evaluation findings or recommendation would have more value when it really feed into stakeholders or players who use the evaluation finding. To do that, more practical, focus on practical and clear actionable recommendations so that stakeholder can use them to drive impactful action. Second point about communication. So when we deliver the evaluation findings report, nobody wanted to see it on the shelves. We wanted our evaluation findings to be well used by who really need those information as evidence-based information. So to do that, it's evaluators like us. Evaluators should present and deliver, communicate well to reach right audience at the right timing. So that's another thing for me, particularly improvement we can make in the future to make more impact from the evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shimako. In the essence of time, and to give you more discussion time for audience in the room and also online, I will move a little bit faster. Now, Ms. Nancy, I'm coming back to you again. You bring a unique perspective here as a consumer of evaluation evidence rather than producer. From your standpoint, what are the core strengths and areas of improvement for independent evaluation when it came to shaping impactful climate action? Additionally, what do you believe are the critical factors to improve uptake of integration of evaluation finding in strategic decision-making on a climate issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that is a very big question. I will try and give you a few different suggestions. Some of the things I say will probably give some thoughts on the points that have been raised by the other speakers. So firstly, just to clarify that our evaluation team, they do work on the EU financing of the EIB, but because we are the EU's development bank and we operate in public and private sector, not only in the EU, but also outside the EU in developing countries all around the world, usually they do evaluations focused on either the EU or outside the EU because it's a very different kind of mandate. But sometimes for climate, they look globally, and I think that that's an important thing to think about. They have done a 2015 to 2020 adaptation evaluation, and that was very much as part of the preparation for our 2021 adaptation plan. So on the timing thing, we had exactly the same point as EBRD. Is it too early or is it too late? In the end, actually, we did it at the same time. We said, okay, the only way this is going to work is if the independent evaluation is going on at the same time that the bank is working on what its sort of adaptation plan should be, so that they are part of the brainstorming at the beginning, but then their findings come in enough time before the end that we can feed in. So that was the way we tried to solve it. And We've done other sectoral things which are very relevant for climate. So, for example, water sector outside the EU, support for SMEs, which had thematic chapter on climate action. And right now we're working on our new climate bank roadmap. Well, we're not sure what it will be called, but we definitely will need a new one because our climate bank roadmap runs to the end of 2025. So we are discussing now with EV, like the same thing, how do we fit the timing? And that is a very important thing that's going on. And I think that it's vital because we need that strategic input that comes from EV. And so one of the things they've done, which I think takes your point, actually, is that they started by actually getting strategic input from within the bank. That doesn't mean that will limit what they do, but often the people inside the bank have pretty much a very good idea of what the bank should be doing in the second half of the critical decade, but they're not always listened to at the beginning. So EV, by listening to them, can actually have one important input is what do the experts inside the organization think are the big challenges and where we need to go. The other thing that I want to highlight is that our work and the evaluation is looking at all 6 building blocks of the MDB's Paris alignment framework. We tend to talk about Paris alignment as only being about new projects, but actually there are 6 building blocks, and I'll come back to them because some of the others are very important. I do want to highlight that for me it's really important that it doesn't only focus on climate finance and green finance. It really has to, in my view, into the green bonds and the climate bonds tend to move to the rest of the bank as a next step. So this interest from bond investors will follow much more widely across the bank. So you can help drive that preparation because that's exactly what you're focused on. Another thing that I think that you've raised and is super important is to highlight the capacity building inside the organization and the human resources needs, because whether it's climate finance targets, whether it's more impact, whether it's Paris alignment, whatever it is, you need people who know what to do and people who are informed and up to date across the entire organization. And I think that you bring that perspective, which helps drive that discussion, that it's not a niche thing. For example, us as the EU Climate Bank, we cannot be a climate bank unless we really have climate experts in every part of what we do. And sometimes that's hard to get people to understand because they tend to think of climate as being like a sector. Yeah. Oh, it's like metros or water. No, it's not. We need people everywhere, including in human resources, including in advisory, including in operations, including in the sector teams, etc. So what are the really big things I think you help us with? I think you help us improve the nitty-gritty, the monitoring, the reporting, the valuation, the verification. I really think you do. I think that you help us be more strategic and build into the strategies that we're developing for, let's say, the next 5 years, the learnings that you bring. And I also think, and I'm going to finish on this point, that you help shine a light on areas that perhaps the organization was hoping not to shine a light on. And sometimes, as I said, this is something that the climate people or the biodiversity people know, but they feel nobody's really listening to them. And you come in, and by you having this wider perspective, you shine a light. What do you shine a light on? Well, we have Sean Kidney sitting over here from Climate Bonds Initiative, and he's going to be pleased to know that I wrote Sustainable Finance. The sustainable finance agenda that's going on through ISSB, through ESRS, through taxonomies, is unavoidable for MDBs. So we have to work out how to handle that. We are large public banks. We are not commercial banks. We have specific mandates for poverty reduction, for climate, whatever it is. But we have to work that out, and EV can help with that. You shine a light on geography, where maybe we're not actually really wanting to be too clear on which areas we are not doing so much in. And you shine that light, and I think that has to be shone. We do not know quite where LDCs and SIDS will come out in the NCQG. We don't know exactly what will happen. But this regional parity discussion and the least developed country discussion, I think you can help us shine a light on that. And the last thing I think that you do, one more, biodiversity. Most of the time the MDB teams will tell you we can't separate climate, nature and biodiversity, and yet a lot of times you hear back, oh, well, let's just start with climate. So EV teams can help the organizations understand, no, you cannot just start with climate. This is not the world we live in, where we have 90% biodiversity loss in some parts of the world since 1970. Look at the WWF latest report. We have to tackle them together, and therefore MDBs have to be aware of that. And the last thing I would say is you shine a light on some metrics that maybe people are a bit frightened of, but we just have to be aware of. We cannot just look at greenhouse gas savings. We cannot just look at renewable energy. We have to look at everything we're financing, and that means the absolute emissions from what we're financing. At the EIB, we've been reporting absolute and relative emissions for over 10 years at project level and aggregated, and we've been having it externally audited. Unless you know not only what the savings are, but also what the actual emissions are from what you finance, you have no idea how what you're financing is impacting the temperature goal. And I think that kind of steely-eyed clarity that can come from EV is really, really important. Thank you.
Wow. I think it was really, again, a pleasure to have you with us. You gave us a 5-year work plan. I think we don't have to do anything now. Just, I have all these lists from SME, the 6 blocks of Paris Agreement, the ex-post, biodiversity, climate change as a cross-cutting. It's not like an isolation. You'll keep it in one department. I can keep on the list.
Capacity building.
Of course, I have
people
it in the top of. That's absolutely here. Capacity building, bonds, FI, M&E. So we'll carefully. This is what the intention and the purpose of this session. I think, if I'm not mistaken, probably this is the first session at a COP level, bringing evaluation perspective at this level. So I'm hoping we'll continue this dialogue. It cannot be one session, Nancy. Some of the issue really you mentioned, each topic deserves a big panel discussion and carrying on this discussion. Now with this, Kevin, let me come back to you. You are mostly working on the evaluation of bilateral development cooperation. From your perspective, how can independent evaluation of the bilateral development cooperation portfolio complement evaluation of MDBs? And what is the role in advancing climate action? Thank you.
Thank you, Eskinder. That's a really good question. I'll try to build on the responses of the previous speakers, all of you. So DEVAL, we're in a unique position. We do strategic evaluations, but we also do evaluation capacity development in partner countries, and we try to apply and improve evaluation methods in all areas. And now that we've done some evaluations on climate, we realize, even though we are quite large, we need evidence to be produced, generated, synthesized much more quickly, especially in the area of climate change, where we see that climate risks are increasing in every aspect. So we have very standard formats, but we're also trying to pilot innovative evaluation formats, shorter formats, or see which kinds of projects have the potential for upscaling, and also which can be implemented more quickly. So I think that's a very good complementary action, also that can complement multilateral evaluations as well. What we need to do is go beyond what works and also see what works quickly and in different contexts. And in climate change and climate action, we have very specific and complex issues related to evaluations. We have shifting baselines. The counterfactual is much more difficult with climate change. We have very long time frames with some of these projects, but also with the climate impacts. There's a lot of complexity, and one of the key issues, and that you might be familiar with if you're an evaluator, is attribution. So Nancy, you just also mentioned we need to go beyond just emissions reductions and so look at all these other aspects like capacity building. How can those have an impact as well? There's so many intermediate outcomes on the way to achieving an emissions reduction. We need to look at all of those in detail. We need elaborative, nested theories of changes. We need to do so much more to look at beyond emissions reduction. Well, what do these projects do? And we're trying to do that, but we need to do it much more collaboratively with all of you. Shimako, you mentioned innovative methods, data like geospatial data. Climate is a very, very good area, and generally environmental changes to use geospatial data and also machine learning approaches, which we're also starting in our evaluations to be able to measure the effect remotely of climate change adaptation interventions. And we're even trying to do that for mitigation as well, just because the data is becoming increasingly good and available to use those methods. That is a very important point. And Theo, you mentioned the importance of change. And that's good. This goes in every aspect. We need to be able to see which projects, how can they be adapted even while they're being implemented? Because one of the shortcomings we have in bilateral cooperation, the processes are so formal and they take so long for a project finance to be approved, to be implemented. So even during implementation, if we see that something works or something doesn't work, this needs to be adapted. This needs to be changed. And right now, some of those processes are not as flexible as we would like, particularly where we need to be responsive and quick in changing our portfolio, but also the project implementations. So it was a bit more quickly, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So with this, now I will open the floor for Q&A. Those of you in the room and also attending online. And also, I want to express our managing director, Marvin. He wasn't able to be with us, but he's attending this session live. He's a passionate advocate of climate change and sustainability, and he was the one who designed a sustainability implementation framework and evaluation for IFC at IEG. So with this, I'll open the floor for discussion. Thank you. Please, ladies first, at the back.
Thank you so much.
And could you please also tell who's you want to address your question? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Marjorie from Recourse. We monitor MDB financing. I'll address these questions to the MDBs who are present here. Actually, we're very glad that the MDB evaluation groups are putting focus on how to measure the quality and impact of climate finance. And for us, that's very important because we want to also be sure that climate finance reaches those who need it and the quality addresses their needs. But as mentioned earlier, there is this problem of attribution gap. And for us, it has something to do with transparency for us outside monitors of the banks, no? Because some of the climate finance are channeled through financial intermediaries and other innovative financing mechanisms where monitoring where the money eventually ends up is a bit difficult, well, at least for us, civil society, because of the lack of transparency of these financing mechanisms. So my question is, how do MDB evaluation groups account for these financing mechanisms and the determination of the attribution of impact when you evaluate them? And my second question is, from an evaluator's perspective, is there value for more public transparency in the MDB's climate finance, not only for accountability, but also so that stakeholders like us can help the bank evaluate its performance in climate and also in other areas of development and eventually help the bank learn better from its practice? Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Sean Kidney from the Climate Bonds Initiative. Nancy called me out earlier. The work of ensuring that evidence-based decision-making is central to what we do on climate is, of course, the essence of what this COP should be about, needs to be about. The last 30 years or 40 years of climate action has been a failure to bring in evidence-based adequately into action. One of the examples of that process of change, the bringing in evidence, and noting that evidence can often be highly contested. You know, the science process is a complex one with lots of different research that keeps changing things. One of the examples, the fruits of that, is the EIB's becoming a climate bank. And that's, I guess, I'm curious about Nancy's reflections on that process, because we had a situation where, and I can remember being at EIB civil society and consultation meetings 15 years ago and making a speech about the importance of the EIB becoming a climate bank. In the European context, that became an influencing of member states, influencing finance to then influence EIB mandates change. I'm curious about how much the, let's say, discussion and wrangling around evidence-based was material to that change as a reflection as a bank, and what that means for other banks and learning about how to change, improve, strengthen their mandates, and of course feedback to other parties who are, let's say, looking at the issue of how best to make, most effectively make evidence-based approaches central to what we do going forward around climate. It's a case study, it seems to me.
Thank you very much. Okay, please, Francesca.
Thank you all. This is a very interesting discussion. I would be curious to ask our evaluation experts how the collaboration with the consumers of your work works. Meaning, are they collaborative? Do they find it as perhaps a burden to work with you on your evaluations? And when I mean consumers, I mean both the perhaps high-level people who would use your information for decision-making purposes, as well as people that you, let me say, that you interview. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Devi, and looks like I'm the only journalist here.
Wow.
Yeah, I happened to go to the loo at the back, and I thought, I've been trying to. So as everyone here is familiar with what happened in the negotiating table, people still fighting very hard for the quantum of the new climate fund target. So my question would be to any of you, the evaluator, what would you differently in terms of managing the scale of finance to the recipient, in this case, the least developed or developing countries? What different policies or what different mechanism, probably in terms of period of disbursement of finance or the period of project, should it be long-term, shorter term, or if there is any lesson that you would apply in the next round of finance? I work for the CNN Indonesia, by the way. Thank you.
Okay, let's maybe. You want to go? Okay, then we'll have those 5 questions, then we'll come back. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. My name is Alex Sanchez. I am Impact and Learning Officer at the Global Methane Hub. We're philanthropy, do re-granting, and we do lots of work with development banks such as the World Bank, and we're trying to have a collaboration with the Asian Development Bank as well. One of the things we are trying to move is catalytic finance in terms of providing some extra small grant to the Development Bank. But I really found interesting the comment of Nancy regarding also how do we evaluate what's the actual carbon footprint of the investments that most of banks are already doing. So we work in 3 sectors that are relevant to methane emissions. One of them is especially organic waste. And we've seen that banks have been, through many years, financing incineration and landfills in general, but without taking into account the greenhouse emissions from those investments. So I was wondering, and I understand there is increasing evidence that this is not the best way to manage greenhouse gas. There is a significant impact. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what has been the uptake from that evidence that has been generated from independent evaluations in the actual portfolios, because we are really struggling, even though we're providing grants to multilateral development banks to shift their portfolios to cleaner projects, cleaner investments in terms of diverting organic waste out of the landfills. It's still something we're struggling, and it's like such an easy switch that we could do. Even though the evidence is out there, seems to be like a hard time getting those uptakes. So if Nancy, you could maybe tell us, or anyone else, like a bit more, how do we actually get to do those changes?
Excellent. Can we go for this 5 round of questions? No, I will come back to you for sure, I promise. Because we are having very interesting questions. Wow. Let me start with the first question. I think it's a very general. It didn't address for anyone. Yes, FI, financial intermediaries, is a challenge, especially when it came to onward lending and the sub-project. But still, I will speak in AIIB. We recently, at operational level, they have updated their environmental and the social policy framework to make sure that those financial intermediaries still be incorporated, particularly when it came to category A project. But is that all? I mean, it's an open discussion for IFC, EBRD. It's a challenge, but work in progress. Your second part question is not accountability, but public trust. Yes, we absolutely agree. That's why, as all evaluators in MEDB, we are a public institution where we're accountable for taxpayers' money. That's what we openly disclosed all our evaluation findings in our website for all the public. And during also the design and the preparation of all our evaluation studies, we will make sure all our stakeholders' voice are heard and consulted. The second question, I think, is Nancy's for you. From how did EIB was able to make it change itself to a climate change bank? How evidence attributed for that change and how other MEDBs can learn from this? Thank you, Nancy.
Yes, well, it was a journey. I think the most important thing to say is it started before we became the climate bank. It started from us having a climate strategy in 2015, which was actually the first strategy policy of the bank that had been fully publicly consulted. And it was our contribution in the lead up to Paris. It was our contribution to what we hoped would be an agreement in Paris, and which in the end, of course, was. Now, in that, we had a very important paragraph that's sometimes sort of forgotten, but it's absolutely critically important. Sometimes people focus a lot on our climate bank roadmap, which is very, very important. But actually, if you go back and look at the documents approved by our board, you will find that they approved not only the climate bank roadmap for 2021 to 25, but a new updated version of the climate strategy. Now, the climate strategy states clearly that any new sector policies or updated sector policies must be clearly underpinned by EU policy, because we're the EU's bank, but this is important. They must be informed by the latest scientific knowledge, pathways to 1.5 degrees, that's our strategic alignment goal, it's 1.5, and the latest available technologies. Because of that, when we then came to do our energy lending policy update in 2019, which is the one where we set our emissions performance standard at 250 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which effectively excluded all unabated fossil fuels. That was the paragraph that drove that discussion, because it very clearly said that we needed to go beyond the current policy to be informed by the latest scientific knowledge and available technologies, best practices. So that strategy from 2015 was the sort of leapfrog. It was not the leapfrog, it was the sort of starting point from which we went then on with the energy lending policy. And we also, to be honest, it was made sort of in the climate team. We had worked with the other MDBs to publish the 6 building block framework in Katowice, because we said MDB financial flows have to be aligned with the Paris goals. We are not excluded, so Article 2.1c clearly applies to us. And then kind of in the EIB, when we were looking at our midterm review of our climate strategy, we said, why don't we try to be the first MDB to use the 6 building block framework? Why don't we try to get out there and try and apply it? And this was picked up in the discussion about becoming the climate bank. So we ended up with 2 really important things. One, that the sector policy aspect, which, as I said, was already enshrined in the climate strategy from 2015, which was updated in 2020. Secondly, that we had to be Paris aligned in all our financing activities, which includes, you know, if you're a bank, that's pretty much everything. And thirdly, of course, when there were these real calls for being a climate bank, we also put up our climate target. But I want to just say one other thing in terms of the journey. We didn't just put it up, we changed it from climate action to climate action and environmental sustainability. That's kind of a long EIB way of saying green. And because we're in an EV panel, I'll tell you why we said, let's call it climate action and environmental sustainability. One, we wanted to support the EU taxonomy. But two, we wanted to be clear that was building on our history of robust climate finance reporting, which was externally audited. We didn't want it to look like we were changing to something that was kind of woolly and undefined. So we wanted to be clear we're reporting climate action, but we're going to add environmental sustainability. We're going to add the rest of green, and we continue to report it and have it externally audited. So that was kind of the journey that we went on. And the climate strategy is still there, Sean, and it still says that all our sector lending policies must be informed by the latest scientific knowledge and 1.5 degrees pathways.
Thank you so much for the detailed response. That's how chartered engineers talk. With fact and the numbers. Okay, Theo, do you want to take Francesca's questions on collaboration during the evaluation process? As you know, we have a multiple of stakeholders from the board, client, beneficiaries. So do you want to highlight on how the process are?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, it can be tricky collaborating. People hear the word independent evaluation and think, you know, this is a sort of version of a corporate assassin or something. My response to this is always twofold. First, when you know people are busy, try not to bother them. I made a promise to my climate team that I would not be going around doing interviews in the 2 weeks before COP or or during COP. That felt like a sort of, you know, reasonable and appropriate response to what was surely going to be a busy month for them. You know, the second thing is by highlighting to, particularly to operational teams, that this is an opportunity for them to present their issues and their challenges and a route that this can then be discussed at the very top. You know, I mean, it's as Nancy was saying earlier, that often the teams themselves, they know what the issues are, they know what the challenges are. What they sometimes lack is a stage to sort of, you know, present those and to discuss those, and we can be that vehicle for that. And so it can be a sort of, you know, beneficial process for them. We're not sort of, you know, going in and grading them. We're going in and saying, right, guys, what is not working, and what can we take to the very top to discuss this a little bit further. The final thing I think which has helped us in terms of our collaboration with management and with our board has been a lot more user input into the evaluation work program. So spending a lot more time consulting on potential evaluation topics and working out you know, what the windows of opportunity are in terms of our ability to influence future strategic decision making. And also working out, you know, where that burden is going to fall, so that we're not sort of, you know, suddenly 3 different evaluations are all converging on the same team at the same time and making their lives quite challenging and quite difficult. And so you know, trying to make sure that we sort of, you know, balance the usability perspective with also what's feasible, because, you know, it can be a burden us going around and speaking to them, and we are aware of that, and we have to continue being aware of that going forward. If it's okay, I'll respond to a couple of the other questions too, you know, now that I've got the microphone.
Okay.
And
can you actually, on that, so can you go to the CNN Indonesia questions,
yeah,
if you
of course.
will?
Yeah.
That was, how do you do differently to help our client in the emerging or developing country? Am I right? That's a question, right?
Well, look, you know, we spend a lot of time as the independent evaluation department trying to encourage the bank to think beyond a simple monetary climate target. So, you know, to think instead around, you know, going from commitments to disbursements, or looking at distribution of financing rather than just a sort of, you know, one big simple number, or looking at the spread between, you know, pure loan versus grant financing, or looking at you know, how effective this financing is. The quality of financing matters too. So, you know, while having a single sort of big target can be a powerful driver, both for the world as a whole and for us as an organization, you know, we have to appreciate that that is a very, very loose proxy for climate finance effectiveness, and for making sure that climate finance goes to where it's most needed and most necessary. And so, you know, we in the independent evaluation department, we do try and spend quite a bit of time, you know, discussing with our board and discussing with our management some of the weaknesses and caveats within a single monetary figure, and some other ways that we can add indicators to that to add a little bit more nuance, you know, around, say, disbursement or around the distribution of financing amongst our more developed and less developed countries of operation, and where, you know, the financing is going, differentiating between mitigation and adaptation and so on. And so, yeah, that's something that we do spend a lot of time discussing. And, you know, going forward, I'm very interested to see what the negotiating teams come out with, and if they do come out with something which has a little bit more complexity and nuance than that sort of single headline figure.
Okay, I think in essence of time, we only have 3 minutes left. So I will go now to, okay, I mean, make it very brief.
Thank you very much. I am also a journalist. My name is Mariana. I'm with Trend News Agency. My question is very brief. I would like to ask your opinion about MDBs and their challenges that they're facing, in particular in Central Asia, when approving climate-related projects or any climate evaluation issues. Like, what challenges do MDBs face in that particular region? Thank you.
Okay. Who want to pick? Shimako, do you want to pick on this one? Or Nancy? Yeah, go ahead. One.
So I don't think it's particular to Central Asia, but I think that it is more of a developing country issue than a developed country issue is the information that's available and the data, especially if we look at adaptation finance. Are the plans in place? In many countries they're not, in many cities they're not. And so the first step when we're doing evaluation, I guess, but also when we're appraising projects, is to try and see how the project fits in the overall climate plans of the country and the city. And if you don't have those in place, you are starting from a slightly weaker standpoint, and you may need to offer technical assistance to that entity for them to actually create a plan. But then, of course, that risks holding up the project. So the challenge, I think, is trying to progress the project while at the same time supporting the country or the city to make the longer-term plan. Because, for example, one resilient project doesn't make your system resilient, right? So you need a plan. So I very, very quickly want to answer two questions from before that weren't answered. Super quick.
On the carbon, right? Yeah.
Methane, I think it's life cycle. Gentleman's not listening.
Yeah. I have it.
Are you listening? Life cycle.
Yes.
You have to push for life cycle. And also the other thing is we need to look at where is the most methane coming and where can it be saved. There's a lot of focus on reductions in the fossil fuel industry. But as you mentioned, we need also big focus on agriculture and land use and all the possible solutions there. But unless you have life cycle, you're not going to pick up a lot of this. And the first question about the NCQG is, I would just say, we are observers, not parties. But obviously, whatever comes out, as was just mentioned by EBRD, we're going to be looking very closely to see how that might affect what we are doing and how we are reporting and what we are tracking.
Absolutely. Okay, Kevin, do you want to react? Want to pick any of? Please go.
Actually, to that last point on the quantum,
please
so
do.
Quality really does matter, like Theo also you said it, Nancy as well. But we really need to improve the transparency and the reporting. So when we see a systematic over-reporting of climate finance or loans are reported equally as grants when they should be the grant equivalent, so we really need to improve that transparency for the quantum to work.
Excellent. Excellent. Shimako, do you want to build any of? What's your reaction to any of the questions?
It's not only Central Asia, but the one challenging evaluation facing is about the policy-based lending program, which has increasingly prominent, particularly in the ADB in the past 3 years, and it's a third lending modality, but particularly not only policy, PBL, but also climate PBL, more finance amount focusing on climate, starting in Philippines or Bangladesh or recently Mongolia, so on. So it's more like expectation coming from our partner countries. But the challenge for evaluation, particularly our department, is how to evaluate the PBL. It's a different modality, and it doesn't have output, more policy action, but how the robust results framework we can build up as a PBL to influence the climate, to influence the climate action of those government agencies. Those are real. We are still we are trying to develop a guideline with PBL, by the way, in ADB, and we are on good progress. But that has been sort of challenging, but we need to address that to find because that's where the evaluation have a role to play to fill the gap. Actually, how to influence the upstream level of the climate action from the policy level.
Thank you very much. What a lovely session. I see the interest online and in-house, but unfortunately we have to stop here. But before that, I want to share with you my 3 critical takeaways. 1, the crucial need for transparency, reporting, and reliable data. I think it was mentioned clearly how important that could be. 2, evaluations are important to give strategic input, improving details, and shining light on areas of sometimes are not seen so much. I think that's also some of the area we should really continue engaging and building on. 3rd, for evaluators to effectively support climate action, it is crucial to keep up with the speed of change, engage early, proactively with stakeholders, and ensure that the timing of evaluation is well aligned with process and organization. With this, ladies and gentlemen, in the room and online, it was a pleasure having you here, and I'm glad that we had such a successful session. Thank you very much.